The ballroom at the Riverside Convention Center glittered with polite applause. Crystal chandeliers reflected the company logo across a giant projection screen. Annual Leadership Awards. 300 employees sat at round tables, dressed in suits and careful smiles. My manager, Greg Halpern, stood at the podium holding a microphone like a trophy. And finally, he said, pausing dramatically, "We have a special recognition tonight." People leaned forward. Greg turned toward me. "Some employees," he continued with a smirk, "spend more time complaining to HR than actually doing their jobs." Laughter rippled across the room. My stomach stayed still. Greg gestured toward my table. "Elena Brooks has submitted 6 complaints about my management this year." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Our HR department confirmed, he added, that none of them had merit. More laughter. Nervous this time. Across the room, Melissa Carter from HR smiled thinly. Greg raised his glass. "So, Elena, maybe next year focus on productivity instead of paperwork." The crowd chuckled again. I slowly stood. No anger. No embarrassment. Just calm. From my purse, I removed a small envelope and placed it gently on the stage beside Greg's notes. "It's good you mentioned HR," I said evenly. He frowned. "Because my next report," I added quietly, "wasn't sent to them alone." I glanced at the projection screen behind him. They were simply the first names on the CC line. The room went silent, and Greg had no idea who the other recipients were. 6 months earlier, I discovered something simple. Abuse rarely begins with shouting. It begins with small adjustments to reality. Greg's first move was subtle. A meeting invitation changed from team review to Elena performance discussion. No warning. 10 people in the room. Greg leaned back in his chair and said, "Elena struggles with deadlines." I had delivered every project early that quarter. But when someone in authority states something confidently, people assume it must be true. I corrected him politely. He smiled. "Let's not get defensive." The phrase landed like a trap. After the meeting, my colleague Jordan Ramirez walked beside me to the elevator.
"That was weird," he said.
"Yes," I replied. Jordan hesitated. "You hit every milestone on the audit project." "I know." He lowered his voice. "So why did he say that?" I didn't answer. Because something about Greg's tone felt practiced. Intentional. That afternoon, I reviewed my project records. Every deadline documented. Every email archived. I opened a private folder on my laptop and titled it Documentation. At the time, I didn't know I was building a case. I only knew one thing. If someone was quietly rewriting my professional history, I would keep the original version. Greg's behavior escalated slowly. Strategic cruelty rarely arrives all at once. 3 weeks later, he reassigned my largest client account without explanation. I asked him privately. He sighed like a patient teacher. "Elena, sometimes people plateau." "I exceeded our targets," I replied calmly. He shrugged. "Numbers don't always show leadership." The conversation ended there. Later that afternoon, Jordan stopped by my desk. "You got pulled off the Anderson project?" "Yes." "That doesn't make sense." I simply nodded. Because Greg's strategy was becoming clearer. Public doubt. Private gaslighting. Small professional wounds that couldn't easily be proven. At home that night, I opened the documentation folder again. I saved the client email praising my work. I saved the performance review Greg had written only 3 months earlier, calling me one of the department's strongest analysts. People forget their own words. Documents don't. Then something interesting happened. Jordan forwarded me a meeting recording from the team's internal system. "I thought you might want this," he wrote. I listened carefully. Greg's criticism of me was there. But so were timestamps showing he had approved my work 2 days earlier. Contradiction. Evidence. A small crack in his narrative. That was the moment I realized something important. Greg assumed I would defend myself emotionally. Instead, I would document everything. I filed my first formal complaint with HR in early March. Melissa Carter, our HR director, greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "Elena," she said, folding her hands. "What seems to be the concern?" I explained Greg's pattern calmly. Public criticism. False statements about performance. Client removal without justification. Melissa listened politely. Then she said the sentence HR departments often rely on. Sometimes management styles differ. I'm not discussing style, I replied. I'm discussing factual misrepresentation. She nodded. Do you have proof? I placed a printed email chain on the table. Greg praising my performance. 2 days later criticizing it. Melissa skimmed the pages. Managers are allowed to change their evaluations, she said. Yes, I agreed. But not retroactively rewrite records. She smiled again. I'll look into it. I left the meeting knowing nothing would happen. Because HR departments protect companies first. Employees second. 3 weeks passed. No update. Then Greg called me into his office. He leaned back in his chair, amused. Going to HR? He said softly.
I didn't react.
Be careful, he continued. That can damage reputations. I'm documenting concerns.
He laughed.
Good luck with that. As I walked back to my desk, I understood something clearly. HR had already told him, and Greg believed that meant he had won. Jordan became the unexpected witness. Not because he wanted to be involved, but because he saw what others pretended not to see. One afternoon, he approached my desk quietly. Greg asked me to rewrite the quarterly report, he said.
How?
To show your department missing deadlines. But we didn't. I know. He looked uncomfortable. I didn't change the numbers. Thank you, I replied. He hesitated. Why is he doing this? Positioning. For what? A promotion. Greg wanted the regional director role opening that summer. To justify restructuring the department, he needed a performance problem. I was that problem.
Jordan leaned against my desk.
Are you going to fight him? I'm going to document him. He laughed softly. That sounds like a lawyer.
Not a lawyer, I said.
Then what? A corporate compliance specialist. Jordan's eyebrows lifted. Most people in the company didn't understand my previous career. Before joining the analytics department, I spent 8 years auditing internal misconduct for another firm, investigating executives, tracing financial irregularities, understanding how policies become weapons. Greg thought I was simply a quiet analyst. He didn't realize my expertise was corporate accountability, and accountability leaves paper trails. When Jordan walked away, I opened a new folder. Policy violations. Because Greg's strategy wasn't just unkind. It was illegal under company guidelines. He simply hadn't read them carefully enough. The next turning point came during the leadership strategy meeting in April. Greg presented a restructuring proposal to senior management. I sat quietly at the conference table while he spoke confidently about department inefficiencies. A slide appeared on the screen. My name sat under a bullet point labeled Performance Risk. The room shifted uncomfortably. Greg continued smoothly. Multiple HR complaints indicate difficulty adapting to leadership direction. The statement was technically true. I had filed complaints, but the implication was reversed. It made me appear problematic. After the meeting, I approached Melissa from HR. You heard Greg's statement, I said calmly. Yes. He presented my complaint as evidence against me. Melissa shrugged lightly. That's interpretation. No, I said. That's retaliation. She sighed. Elena, these conflicts can become messy. I agree. So perhaps it's better to focus on moving forward. I looked at her carefully. You mean drop the complaint? I didn't say that. But she had. That evening I reviewed the company's compliance handbook. Section 12.4. Retaliation against employees reporting misconduct is grounds for immediate investigation. I printed the page. Then I drafted a new email. Subject line. Follow-up documentation regarding retaliation. Before sending it, I paused. Because this time I wasn't going to rely on HR alone. This time I would expand the audience. Carefully. Strategically. Quietly. And the CC line would begin to grow. Corporate structures operate like ecosystems. Every department protects itself. But some divisions exist outside internal politics. Our company had one such entity. The Ethics and Compliance Oversight Board. Most employees barely knew it existed, but its job was simple: investigate misconduct that internal HR might overlook. I drafted a detailed report that evening. Not emotional, not accusatory, just facts,
Dates.
meeting transcripts, policy references, evidence attachments, Jordan's forwarded recordings, email inconsistencies, Greg's contradictory evaluations. When the document reached 20 pages, I stopped. Then I opened the email window. Recipient: Melissa Carter, HR Director. CC: Ethics Oversight Board. CC: Legal Compliance Office. CC: Regional Executive Council. I stared at the screen for a moment. Greg believed HR was his shield. But HR's authority ended where corporate governance began. I attached the report. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't send it yet. Timing matters. Evidence is powerful. But public context multiplies its impact. And I suspected the perfect moment would arrive soon. Greg's ambition was growing louder. Ambition often creates the stage for its own exposure. I just needed to wait. Strategic patience is not silence. It's preparation. The Leadership Awards announcement arrived in early June. Greg was nominated for Manager of the Year. The irony was almost poetic. Jordan forwarded me the internal memo. "Are you seeing this?" he wrote. "Yes." "You're still planning something, right?" "I'm documenting," I replied.
He sighed.
"Elena, this feels bigger than documentation." Maybe it was. But I wasn't interested in dramatic confrontation. I wanted accountability. Real consequences. Greg's nomination created the perfect environment. A room full of executives. Public recognition. Corporate pride on display. If Greg's conduct surfaced then, the company couldn't quietly bury it. I opened the email draft again. 20 pages of documentation. Carefully referenced policies. Objective language. The CC line remained unchanged. Ethics Board. Legal Compliance. Executive Council. I added one more recipient. External Regulatory Liaison. Because our company operated under government contracts. Workplace retaliation could trigger compliance review. I saved the draft again. Not sent. Not yet. Jordan stopped by my desk later that afternoon. "You're really calm about all this," he said. "I've done investigations before. And people underestimate quiet people." He nodded slowly. "And Greg definitely underestimates you."
Yes, he did.
Which is why the award ceremony would become the stage he never expected. And the email would arrive exactly when the spotlight was brightest. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Greg tried one final maneuver. He called me into his office late Friday afternoon. The room smelled faintly of expensive cologne and overconfidence. "Elena," he began smoothly, "I'm concerned about your attitude. I'm open to feedback." He slid a document across the desk. A performance improvement plan. My eyes scanned the page calmly. Missed deadlines. Communication issues. Team conflict. None of it was accurate. "This document is incorrect," I said. "It reflects management concerns. It reflects retaliation." Greg leaned forward slightly. "You really need to stop using that word." "I'll stop when the behavior stops." He smiled patiently. "You could sign the plan, and we move forward. And if I don't, we escalate." I placed the paper back on the desk. "I'll need time to review." "Of course." As I stood to leave, Greg added quietly, "You've been difficult lately." I paused at the door. "I've been documenting." His smile tightened. "That won't end well for you." I nodded politely. Because he was right about one thing. This situation would escalate. Just not the direction he expected. Back at my desk, I saved a copy of the improvement plan. Then I added it to the report. Evidence number 23. Greg had just strengthened the case against himself. Jordan read the improvement plan and shook his head. "This is ridiculous." "It's predictable," I replied. He lowered his voice. "Are you sending the report now?" "Not yet." "When?" "Soon." Jordan leaned against the cubicle wall. "You know Greg thinks HR is backing him." "I know. And Melissa definitely warned him about your first complaint. Yes. He looked thoughtful. Then why include HR again? Because transparency matters. Jordan smiled faintly. You're setting a trap.
Not a trap, I said.
A record. That night I updated the report again. 24 pages now. Each claim supported by documents. Internal policy citations. Time-stamped communications. The final section addressed retaliation specifically. Corporate Policy Section 12.4. Federal Workplace Guidelines. Legal exposure risks. I wrote carefully. Not emotional. Not personal. Just professional analysis. At the end, I added one sentence. Failure to address documented retaliation may expose the company to regulatory review. Truth is powerful when written calmly. I closed the document and saved the file. The award ceremony was 3 days away. Greg would stand on stage believing his narrative had succeeded. HR would sit confidently beside the executives. And the email would arrive quietly in their inboxes. Right when the spotlight was brightest. Timing would do the rest. The night of the award ceremony arrived warm and bright. Riverside Convention Center glowed with polished marble floors and carefully arranged optimism. Employees filled the ballroom with polite excitement. Greg looked particularly confident. His tailored suit, his wide smile, the easy handshake with senior executives. Jordan sat beside me at our table. You okay? He asked quietly. I'm prepared. You brought the envelope? I nodded. Inside it was a printed summary of the report. Not the full document. Just the opening page. Enough to signal what had happened. The projector screen displayed award categories.
Team leadership.
Innovation. Operational excellence. Greg clapped enthusiastically for each winner. Finally, the host announced the Manager of the Year presentation. Greg straightened in his chair. When his name was called as the nominee, the room applauded warmly. He walked to the stage confidently. I watched calmly. Jordan leaned closer. Is the email sent? Not yet. Greg began speaking about leadership, integrity, supporting employees. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. As he finished his speech and raised his glass toward the audience, I opened my phone. The email draft waited patiently. 24 pages attached. Multiple recipients listed. I pressed send. Then I stood up and walked toward the stage. The envelope rested quietly in my hand. And the room had no idea what was arriving in their inboxes. When Greg finished speaking, the applause lasted longer than usual. Public praise has a momentum of its own. Executives nodded approvingly. Melissa from HR smiled beside the stage. Greg basked in the attention. Then he noticed me approaching. Elena, he said lightly into the microphone. Here to congratulate your manager? A few people laughed. I stepped beside him calmly. I'm here to clarify something. The room quieted slightly. Greg lowered the microphone toward me. Go ahead. I placed the envelope on the podium. I recently submitted a detailed report regarding workplace retaliation. Greg's smile flickered. HR has already reviewed those concerns, he said smoothly. Yes, I replied. But this report wasn't sent only to HR. A few executives exchanged glances. Greg's expression tightened. What exactly are you implying? I nodded toward the projection screen behind him. Check your email. Several people instinctively reached for their phones. Melissa's smile disappeared. Greg looked confused. What email? The one documenting 24 policy violations. The silence that followed felt heavy. Someone near the front row spoke softly. I just received something. Another voice murmured. So did I. Greg turned toward Melissa. Her face had gone pale. I stepped back from the podium. No further comment tonight, I said calmly. Then I returned to my seat beside Jordan. The applause never resumed. Instead, the ballroom filled with the quiet sound of executives reading their inboxes. And Greg realized the narrative had just changed. Corporate reactions rarely happen instantly. First comes confusion, then verification, then concern. By the time the ceremony ended, 3 senior executives had already left the ballroom. Phones pressed to their ears. Greg remained near the stage, Speaking urgently with Melissa. Jordan watched carefully. Something's happening, he whispered. Yes. The email report contained attachments Greg hadn't expected. Meeting recordings. Performance documents. Contradictory evaluations. The improvement plan he issued days earlier. And most importantly, internal policy citations clearly defining retaliation. Executives don't ignore documents that expose legal risk. Within 30 minutes, the regional director approached Greg directly. I saw their conversation from across the room. The director's posture stiff. Greg's defensive gestures growing sharper. Melissa stood beside them looking deeply uncomfortable. Jordan exhaled slowly. I think the award is over. It was never about the award. Greg glanced toward our table briefly. Our eyes met. For the first time since this began, his confidence looked uncertain. Not defeated yet. Just shaken. Investigations take time. Consequences unfold gradually. But the moment that night had shifted something important. Greg had spent months controlling the narrative. Now the narrative belonged to the evidence. And evidence is difficult to argue with. The formal investigation began the following Monday. 2 representatives from the Ethics Oversight Board arrived quietly. They requested interviews with several employees. Jordan was among the first. When he returned from the meeting room, he sat across from me. They asked about the meeting recordings, he said. And I confirmed everything. He looked thoughtful. Elena, they already knew most of it. Yes. They referenced specific policy sections. That's their job. Jordan leaned back in his chair. Greg looked nervous this morning. That didn't surprise me. Because investigations create pressure. First internally, then externally. By Wednesday, Greg's access to certain management systems had been temporarily restricted. Not publicly announced, but noticeable. Employees pay attention to subtle signals. Rumors began spreading through the department. Melissa from HR avoided eye contact with me. Her authority had been quietly undermined by the escalation. Friday afternoon, Greg stopped by my desk. His tone was controlled but strained. You went outside HR. Yes. That damages trust. Trust was already damaged. He stared at me for a long moment. You've made this bigger than it needed to be. No, I said calmly. I made it visible. He walked away without another word. The investigation had only begun. But the first crack in his professional image had already formed. Consequences in corporate environments rarely arrive dramatically. They accumulate. First, Greg's nomination for Manager of the Year quietly disappeared from internal announcements. No explanation. Just absence. Employees noticed. Then the regional director scheduled a mandatory leadership meeting. Greg was not invited. Jordan texted me from the conference room. Your report is definitely being discussed. By the following week, Greg's authority over hiring decisions was temporarily suspended. That detail spread quickly among team managers. Control slipping.
Piece by piece.
Greg's behavior changed. Less confident. More defensive. One afternoon, he approached my desk again. You could withdraw the report, he said quietly. It's already under review. You started this. No, I replied. Your decision started it. His jaw tightened. You've embarrassed me. Documentation is an embarrassment. It will destroy my career. That depends on the findings. For a moment, he looked genuinely tired. This could have been handled privately. It was, I said. HR dismissed it. Greg said nothing. Because we both knew that part was true. He walked away slowly. Jordan watched from across the office. He's starting to realize, he murmured later. Yes. Realize what? That documentation doesn't disappear. And once a formal investigation begins, the outcome no longer belongs to the people involved. It belongs to the system. The investigation uncovered something neither Greg nor I had expected. Patterns. Not just involving me. 2 former employees came forward with similar complaints. Public criticism. Private intimidation. Career damage after raising concerns. The ethics board expanded the review. Greg's management history was examined carefully. Performance evaluations. Internal communications. Promotion recommendations. Jordan told me about the shift in tone during interviews. They're asking about other team members now. That means the scope expanded. He nodded slowly. Greg thought you were the only one. So did I. But misconduct rarely targets a single person. It's usually a pattern waiting for documentation. By mid-month, Greg's responsibilities were temporarily reassigned to another manager. The announcement described it as administrative restructuring. Corporate language often softens reality. But everyone understood what it meant. Greg stopped attending daily meetings. His office door stayed closed. Melissa from HR remained unusually quiet. Because the investigation had revealed something uncomfortable. She had dismissed my original complaint without proper review. That failure now appeared in the report as well. Jordan shook his head when he heard the update. So, this isn't just about Greg anymore. No, I said. It's about systems. Accountability spreads when evidence exposes weaknesses. And systems that ignore warning signs rarely escape scrutiny. Financial consequences arrived next. Greg's promotion review was officially postponed. That decision carried significant impact. The regional director position included a substantial salary increase and executive bonus structure. Without the promotion, Greg's financial expectations shifted dramatically. Corporate investigations rarely mention money directly. But promotions determine income, and reputations determine promotions. Jordan brought the update to my desk one morning. Promotion review delayed pending investigation. That's standard procedure. Greg was counting on that position. I'm sure he was. Jordan studied my expression. You're not enjoying this.
No.
Why not? Because revenge was never the objective. Accountability was. I wanted the behavior to stop, I said. It has. Jordan nodded slowly. But Greg's situation continued deteriorating. His authority diminished. His reputation questioned. The professional network he had built began quietly distancing itself. Colleagues who once laughed at his jokes now avoided private meetings. No one wants to stand too close to an ongoing investigation. Professional survival instincts activate quickly. Greg had built his influence carefully over years. Now that influence was dissolving one conversation at a time. Not through anger, through documentation. And documentation leaves very little room for negotiation. Greg's personal life began showing cracks as well. Corporate stress rarely stays at the office. One afternoon, Claire, Greg's wife, appeared unexpectedly in the lobby. I didn't know her well, but Jordan recognized her from company events. They looked like they were arguing, he whispered later.
I didn't comment.
Because personal consequences fall outside professional responsibility. But they still exist. Investigations create pressure. Pressure spreads. By that week's end, Greg requested a meeting with me privately. We sat in an empty conference room. His voice sounded tired. You've made your point, he said. This isn't about points. What do you want? Policy enforcement. He rubbed his temples. Claire thinks I should resign. That's your decision. You know this will follow me. Accountability usually does. He looked at me carefully. You really planned all this? No, I said quietly. I documented it. There's a difference. Planning revenge requires emotion. Documentation requires patience. Greg exhaled slowly. I underestimated you. Yes, I agreed. That acknowledgement felt strangely honest. Not hostile, just factual. And sometimes the most powerful moment in any conflict arrives when the other person finally sees the situation clearly. Even if it's too late to change it. Public image damage followed next. The investigation findings remained confidential, but the outcome could not remain invisible forever. 3 weeks later, the company released a short internal announcement. Greg Halpern would be transitioning out of his management role effective immediately. No detailed explanation. Corporate language again. But the message was unmistakable. Jordan forwarded the announcement. That's it, he said. Yes. Greg's office was cleared quietly that afternoon. A temporary manager took over the department. Melissa from HR remained in her position, but her authority was noticeably reduced. She avoided discussing the situation publicly, which was understandable. The report had included a section documenting HR's failure to investigate properly. Jordan leaned against my desk later that day. You realize everyone knows you started this. I submitted documentation. Same difference. He smiled slightly. People are calling you fearless. I'm not fearless. Then what? Prepared. He laughed softly. That's actually more intimidating. Maybe it was. Because calm preparation unsettles people more than emotional confrontation. Greg left the building that evening without speaking to anyone. His departure was quiet, but the impact of his actions remained. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the natural conclusion of documented behavior meeting institutional accountability. The legal phase arrived quietly but firmly. 2 weeks after Greg's departure, the company's legal department contacted me for a final statement. Not because they doubted the investigation, but because documentation creates obligations. They wanted confirmation that my complaint had been addressed appropriately. I met with the compliance officer in a glass-walled conference room. He reviewed the report carefully. You understand the seriousness of what you reported, he said. Yes. And the company appreciates the documentation you provided. That was my intention. He nodded. The investigation confirmed multiple policy violations. That part didn't surprise me. Your cooperation prevented a potentially larger legal exposure. Corporate language again, but meaningful. Jordan waited outside when the meeting ended. Well, he asked. It's over. He exhaled slowly. You actually did it. I followed procedure. You protected yourself. Yes. And the company. Also yes. Jordan smiled thoughtfully. Greg thought you were just an analyst. People often assume that. But you were basically running an investigation the whole time. Documentation is investigation. And sometimes the most effective weapon in professional conflict is in anger. It's evidence assembled patiently and presented at exactly the right moment. Life in the department gradually stabilized. The temporary manager, Linda Shaw, focused on rebuilding trust. Her leadership style was calm and transparent. Team meetings became collaborative again. Deadlines returned to normal rhythms. Jordan noticed the change first. It's quieter now, he said. Yes. No tension. Accountability tends to remove tension. He smiled. People respect you more. That's not why I documented anything. But it's the result. Respect built from calm professionalism often lasts longer than respect built from authority. Linda invited me to a strategy meeting one afternoon. We're restructuring the analytics division, she explained. I'd like your input. That invitation carried subtle significance. Greg had tried to portray me as problematic. Now leadership was asking for my perspective. Jordan noticed the shift too. You're basically running half the project planning now. Temporary assistance. Maybe, but the department needed stability. And experience helped stabilize uncertain environments. I focused on the work, not the history, because rebuilding systems matters more than dwelling on conflict. Still, occasionally I thought about that evening at the award ceremony. The envelope, the email, the quiet moment when evidence replaced narrative, and how quickly a carefully constructed illusion can dissolve when facts appear in the light. 6 months later, Linda called me into her office. She closed the door and smiled. The company is creating a new role. What kind of role? Internal compliance analyst. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds familiar. It should. She slid a document across the desk. The position involved reviewing internal policy concerns before they escalated, preventing situations like Greg's from repeating. You're uniquely qualified, Linda said. My previous experience suddenly made sense to leadership. Jordan laughed when I told him. They basically created a job for you. Not for me. For the function. But you're perfect for it. Maybe. But the opportunity represented something larger. The company had learned from the investigation. Systems improved when weaknesses become visible. Linda looked relieved when I accepted. Transparency helps organizations survive, she said. Yes, I replied. And people who understand transparency are valuable. Jordan summed it up more simply later. You turned a bad situation into a promotion. I turned documentation into improvement. Either way, the department had moved forward. And so had I. Reinvention rarely feels dramatic. It feels steady. The new compliance role allowed me to review internal processes across multiple departments. Policies became practical tools instead of forgotten handbook pages. Employees began approaching me quietly with questions. Not complaints. Questions. How do we document concerns properly? What protections exist? How do we prevent retaliation? Jordan often joked that I had become the calmest watchdog in the building. Maybe he was right, but the goal wasn't punishment. It was prevention. Linda invited me to leadership workshops where transparency became part of management training. Greg's situation was never mentioned by name, but the lessons were clear. Respect documentation. Investigate complaints. Protect employees who report concerns. Culture shifts slowly, but it shifts. One afternoon, I walked past the same conference room where Greg had once presented his restructuring plan. Now, another manager was discussing team development strategies. The difference in tone felt noticeable. Constructive. Collaborative. Jordan joined me in the hallway. You ever think about how different things could have gone? Yes. If you hadn't documented everything. Yes. He nodded thoughtfully. Then we'd probably still be dealing with Greg. Maybe. But documentation had changed the trajectory. Quietly. Permanently. A year after the award ceremony, the company hosted the event again. Same ballroom. Same chandeliers. Different atmosphere. Jordan nudged me as we entered. Full circle moment. Maybe. The host announced leadership recognition awards. Linda received Manager of the Year. The applause felt genuine. No tension. No uneasy laughter. Just appreciation. After the ceremony, several executives approached me privately. They thanked me for helping strengthen internal compliance systems. Not publicly. Just quiet acknowledgement. Jordan raised an eyebrow. You're basically the reason they're taking accountability seriously now. I helped reveal a problem. And helped fix it. Perhaps. But organizational improvement rarely comes from one person. It comes from moments when someone chooses documentation over silence. As we left the ballroom, I noticed the same stage where Greg once stood confidently. The memory felt distant now. Not painful, just instructive. Jordan asked the question people often ask about conflict resolution. Do you ever regret pushing the investigation? I considered that carefully.
No.
Why not? Because accountability protects everyone. He nodded slowly, and the quiet truth settled comfortably between us. Systems only improve when someone insists they should. 2 years have passed since that night. The envelope, the email, the silence in the ballroom when executives open their inboxes. My career looks different now. The compliance division has grown. Our team reviews internal concerns across multiple offices. Employees know documentation matters. Leadership knows complaints require attention. Jordan still works in analytics. He occasionally reminds new hires about the story. The calmest person in the room once took down a manager with a single email. I usually laugh when he says that, because it wasn't one email. It was months of careful documentation, patience, professional restraint. Greg eventually found work at another company. I heard that through industry contacts. His career didn't end, but it changed. Accountability leaves marks. And sometimes those marks become lessons. For me, the situation was never about humiliation. Not his. Not mine. It was about refusing to let quiet misconduct rewrite reality. When I first filed that complaint, people assumed the system would ignore it. They almost did. But evidence has a persistent voice. And once it's heard, silence becomes impossible. In protecting the truth of what happened, I didn't just defend my career. I finally proved, to myself most of all, that calm clarity can reshape power itself.